I didn't cry at the funeral. Grief is a strange, private storm. It doesn't fall on the day you expect. For me, it didn't come in the chapel, not during the eulogies, not even when they lowered her casket into the soil. It came the next morning. Not in tears, but in silence. In the sound of my keycard clicking uselessly against the office door. In the way her son looked through me, like I was a retired secretary wandering into a meeting I didn't belong in. The night before, I'd barely slept. I had spent it pacing the hallway of the house Leslie and I built together. Our house. Every plank, every nail, every color on the walls had been argued over, laughed over, lived in. It smelled like her. Still does. Jasmine shampoo, peppermint tea, and the faintest trace of her old leather bag that always sat by the front door. I walked past the empty kitchen, the quiet bedroom, and into my study, our study, and sat staring at a picture of us on the day we opened the company. Leslie wore white that day. Not a wedding dress. A sharp blazer and jeans. Her hair pinned up, her sleeves rolled. She stood next to me on the concrete floor of the warehouse we could barely afford. There were no desks yet, just folding tables and cheap shelving. But we had plans. Big ones. I still remember the way she laughed when I said, "Someday this place will have glass walls and bad coffee." It did, eventually, but none of that mattered anymore. The morning after the funeral, I arrived at the office expecting. Not much. Quiet morning. Maybe a few flowers at the reception. An inbox full of condolences from clients. I wore a black suit again, out of respect, and walked through the front doors with the sluggish weight of someone who still wasn't sure if the world had actually changed, or if grief was just distorting the air. Then I saw them, all the cars in the lot. A full boardroom through the glass. People standing, some sitting. Someone from legal, marketing, even that smug kid from HR who never looked me in the eye. I felt it before I saw it. Leslie and I shared leadership equally. I was logistics, systems, operations. She was pitch, branding, vision. We balanced each other. She told the story. I made it real. Even in sickness, she was fierce about keeping both our names on everything. But I knew Zach. I knew the weight of his silence at our dinner table. The way he never once asked how the business worked. He was a man who inherited the confidence of others, not one who earned his own. Still, I walked into the room, sat at my usual seat, waited. Zach stood at the head of the table like he'd been there all his life, wearing one of his expensive, too-tight suits, the kind Leslie used to call funeral cosplay. His face was unreadable, but his hands gave him away. They always did. Left thumb rubbing against his palm. A twitch, a tremor, the same one he had when he used to lie about being late to school. No one greeted me, cleared my throat. Morning. Some turned. Nods. One stiff smile. Zach didn't flinch. He just placed his coffee cup, a custom mug I had made for Leslie on our 10th year in business, onto the table and spoke. As of today, I'll be stepping in as the new leader of my mother's company. He said it like it was fact, like it had always been written somewhere in the stars, and he was simply pointing it out for those who hadn't noticed. No vote, no questions, just a smooth continuation of power, from mother to son. That was the implication. Not a single person looked at me, not then. He went on to thank the board for their patience during this difficult time, then referenced a few clients he'd reached out to on behalf of the family. I sat frozen. Did he even hear himself? Family. He hadn't stepped foot in that office in 5 years. Not since Leslie caught him using company funds to finance his short-lived music label. Business experimentation, he called it. A necessary failure. Leslie called it what it was. Theft. We paid it back quietly. No charges. No scandal. Just shame. And now he was here using words like legacy and vision like they belonged to him. When he opened the floor for questions, someone from operations asked about quarterly targets. Another asked about restructuring. Still another asked about next steps. I could have spoken then. Could have said, "You don't have the authority," or "You're out of your depth." But I didn't, because somewhere between my ears, the storm had stopped. Everything felt still, like when you've been standing in the rain so long you don't even notice you're soaked. I waited until the end. Watched him smile for the closing. Watched him shake hands, nod with false humility, and perform the role of inheritor like he was born into it. Then I stood, adjusted my jacket, and left the room. He didn't even glance in my direction. At my desk, I found a sealed envelope. Inside was a typed memo announcing a leadership transition. It was stamped with the company letterhead, the one Leslie designed, the one with our initials curled together in the corner. My name was nowhere on it. When I tried to log into the internal system, my password had been changed. By the time I got back home, the shared drive access was gone. My work phone disconnected. My calendar wiped. He hadn't even waited a full day. Less than 24 hours after burying his mother, he was trying to bury me. A week earlier, that would have broken me. Now, it just confirmed something I had always suspected. Zach didn't want a family. He wanted control. He wanted the seat without the weight, the title without the burden. And now that Leslie was gone, he thought the world owed him both. But there was something he didn't know. Leslie and I built this company together, not just in spirit, but in contract. When we mortgaged our apartment to fund the first 3 shipments, we signed papers that no one else ever read. When the company hit its first million, we revised those papers. And when Leslie got sick, we added one more clause. She didn't trust Zach with the business. Not really. She loved him, yes, but she didn't trust him. That's why she made sure that in the event of her passing, the controlling shares would default not to next of kin, but to the surviving founder. Me. 67%. Signed. Witnessed. Sealed. I stood in the kitchen that night, staring at the mug he had used. The one I had given Leslie on the 10th anniversary of the company's founding. It read, "We didn't inherit this. We earned it." And I thought, Monday is going to be interesting. Friday morning arrived with the scent of snow on the wind. That dry, metallic sharpness that settles in the lungs before the weather turns. I stood in the doorway of my home and stared at the mailbox, as if I already knew what would be inside. I had barely slept. My body moved, but my mind felt like a slowed reel, thoughts dragging behind reality by several seconds. Grief does that. Betrayal too. The envelope was waiting, cream-colored, thick paper. My name typed, not handwritten. No return address. That's how I knew it was from him. Zach didn't write letters. He sent declarations. I opened it slowly, not from caution, but from exhaustion. I had been expecting the blow. I just hadn't known how clumsily he would deliver it. Inside were 2 items. The first, a printed email, dated the night before. It read, in corporate language so sanitized it barely qualified as human speech. "We appreciate your many years of contribution to the company. Effective immediately, your employment is concluded. Attached is your farewell package. Please review the terms with your attorney. Nothing personal. Just business. Z.M. Nothing personal." That phrase echoed louder than it should have. I could almost hear him saying it, that same smug tone he used when explaining away his failures in college, when blaming others for missed deadlines or ruined relationships. It was always nothing personal. Just choices. Just business. The second item in the envelope was worse. A resignation letter. Signed. Dated. From me. Except I never wrote it. He'd forged it. Or had someone do it. It was subtle. He knew how I signed things, had seen my name enough times. But the tail of the G curved too sharply. The E was too tight. My hand always trembled slightly on paper, ever since the accident in '09. This one didn't. It was imitation. Clean, confident mockery. He had fired me, retroactively. And now, legally, on paper anyway, it looked like I had resigned. I sat on the porch bench and stared at the papers in my lap, and I didn't feel rage. That would have been easier. What I felt was vacancy. Like someone had walked into my life with a crowbar and quietly pried up the floorboards, one by one, while I was busy mourning the only woman who ever understood me. He hadn't waited a week. Not a week. Leslie's voice was still on the answering machine. But then, of course he hadn't waited. That was Zach's way. His whole life, he had lived in the empty spaces other people carved out. He floated in and out of jobs, relationships, opportunities, always claiming destiny, always invoking the family name. But when it came time to build something, to actually labor beneath the weight of creation, he vanished. Until now. Now, with Leslie gone and the boardroom echoing with condolences, he had seen his chance. To take the company. To rewrite the story. To cast himself as heir to something he never built. And me? He wanted me gone. Scrubbed. Erased. Not even as an enemy, but as an inconvenience. But Zach had made one mistake. Just one. And it was enough. He hadn't read the documents. The real ones. Leslie and I had spent the last years tightening every seam of the company structure. We planned for everything. Cancer forced us to. Death was no longer abstract. So we prepared. The clause had been buried in the operating agreement, Article 9, subsection 3. Plain language. In the event of the death or permanent incapacity of either founding party, majority shares and decision-making rights shall transfer to the surviving co-founder unless explicitly contested by notarized amendment, executed prior to death. There was no amendment. Leslie hadn't changed a thing. She never planned to. She knew him. She had known this would happen. I hadn't wanted to believe it. But now, holding that forged letter in my hands, I understood why she'd insisted on the extra witness signatures, why she'd walked me through the clauses herself, her hands trembling after chemo, her eyes burning with quiet resolve. "He'll try something," she'd said. "Promise me you'll be ready." I promised. And now I made one phone call, not to confront Zach. Not yet. To my attorney, James Carter. A man I didn't particularly like, but respected the way you respect a well-maintained weapon. Cold. Precise. No frills. I told him everything. Sent him the documents. The forged resignation. The severance memo. The operating agreement. He went quiet for a long time. Then he said one sentence. "You're still the majority owner, George. He doesn't have the legal authority to terminate you." I asked what we should do. He chuckled. "Just once. Nothing yet. Let him dance a little longer." So I waited. And during that wait, I studied. I reviewed every file Leslie and I had drafted. Every board appointment. Every clause. I pulled payroll records. Bonus logs. Vendor contracts. Even HR complaints. There had been more than a few under Zach's brief internship years ago. I printed them, organized them, compiled them into a folder so thick it needed a binder clip. Then I wrote a letter of my own. Not to him. To the board. 5 pages. Straight facts. No accusations. Just a timeline. A reminder of what had been built and by whom. A summary of the ownership structure. A note on the forged signature. Not yet a legal accusation, but enough of a warning to make them shift in their chairs. I ended it with a simple line. "I will return on Monday at 11 a.m. to resume my role. Attendance is mandatory." I slept better that night than I had in weeks. Not because I was ready for war, but because I no longer felt like I had to explain myself to a ghost. Leslie was gone, but she had left me one final gift. The truth on paper, and the power to wield it. Zach, in his arrogance, had played the wrong hand. He thought the game was over. He never realized the dealer had changed. Monday, 10:59 a.m. I stood in the elevator alone. Floor 24. The top. Our floor. The folder in my hand felt heavier than it was. Not because of the weight of the paper, but the weight of years, of struggle, of memory, of promises made beside hospital beds and on warehouse floors before there were desks or salaries or forecasts. That folder wasn't just a rebuttal. It was evidence. Of truth. Of time. Of who we had been before Zach ever decided to come back and try to inherit a kingdom he never bled for. When the doors opened, I expected silence. What I found instead was motion. People. Quiet but moving. Whispering. Heads turning. Screens flickering off. Desks cleared. Conversations ending mid-sentence. And then stillness. I stepped into the office not as a ghost or a guest, but as what I had always been. The man who built it. Zach was already in the boardroom. He hadn't seen me yet. He was sitting at the head of the table again, suit freshly pressed, one hand curled around a branded coffee cup. My coffee cup. The one I had left behind in my office drawer after Leslie's funeral. He must have gone through my desk. He was laughing at something when he finally looked up. His smile didn't drop right away. It lingered for half a second. A twitch of confusion, not fear. Then the recognition hit. Then the panic. I opened the door fully and stepped inside. No one spoke. Not him. Not the others. I set the folder down at my old seat. The seat that still bore my nameplate. The one he hadn't dared to remove yet. And I said 3 words. "We start at 11. He blinked. "George. What the hell are you?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't posture. I simply opened the folder and handed the first copy to the secretary seated by the printer. "Distribute these. Now." She obeyed. Quickly. Efficiently. She had been with us since year 3. She knew the real hierarchy. Not the one Zach had tried to fabricate, but the one forged in the crucible of late nights, unpaid invoices, and impossible deadlines met only through sweat and compromise. Zach stood up, shoulders tight. "This is trespassing. You don't work here anymore. You resigned." I raised my hand. No emotion. "Sit down." He flinched, but didn't move. I turned to the room. "Inside your packet you'll find the original operating agreement. Dated. Witnessed. Signed by both founders. You'll also find a forged resignation letter, submitted last week. Compare the signatures." Several did. A ripple passed through the boardroom like a sudden shift in air pressure. Uneasy. Slow. Real. "Next," I said, flipping a page. "You'll find my equity breakdown. 67%. Majority. With full legal authority to appoint or remove executive leadership." Zach stepped forward. Red-faced. "Loud now. You can't just, this is a hostile takeover. You can't walk in here and pretend." I didn't let him finish. I pulled the final envelope from the folder and handed it to him directly. This one I had signed myself. With a pen Leslie once bought me, the one I used to sign every raise, every hire, every check that kept this company alive when Zach was still wasting time on clubs and trust fund ventures. "This," I said, "is your termination." He stared at it. Didn't open it. "You're not serious." "I'm not pretending," I said. "You are." He looked around the room, searching for allies. Eyes darting. But no one moved. Not even the ones who had nodded politely during his little coronation last week. They weren't loyal to him. They had tolerated him, same as they would tolerate any storm that passed through. But now they saw the tide shift. And business people, real ones, can smell power like blood in water. He tried one last time. "You can't do this. I'm her son." I didn't blink. And I was her partner. In life. In business. In legacy. And she made her choice. I gestured toward the signature on the share transfer clause. "In writing." He stood there, chest heaving, face pale. "You think this makes you look strong?" He spat. "Kicking out her only child right after she dies? You think that's what she wanted?" I held his gaze. "I think," I said. "She wanted the company she built not to be run into the ground by a man who's never finished anything he started." He swayed slightly, like the words had weight, like they landed where others had bounced off. "You're a bitter old man," he said, lower now, trying for venom. "That's all. You're just mad she's gone and no one wants you around." For a moment I almost responded, but instead I turned to the board. "I'll be appointing an interim CEO effective immediately. Her name is Sarah Liu. She's been with us since the first year. She's never missed a deadline, never stolen from us, never lied to her mother." Sarah, who had been silent until now, stood slowly. She nodded to me, then to the others. Zach didn't speak again. Security arrived not long after. They didn't touch him. Didn't have to. They just stood in the doorway, waiting. I gave him one chance. "Walk out with dignity," I said. "Or be removed." He looked at the envelope in his hand, then at me, then back at the room, and then he left. Not a word, not a threat, just silence. After he was gone, I sat back in the chair. No one applauded. No one cheered. This wasn't a victory. It was a correction. An overdue alignment. A reminder that names don't build companies, work does. Loyalty does. Partnership does. When the meeting ended, people filtered out slowly. A few offered quiet words. Nods. One handshake. Sarah lingered last. "You did the right thing," she said. I nodded. Then I gathered my folder, walked back to my office, the one Zach had tried to claim as his own, and packed nothing. I didn't need anything from there anymore. My work was done. I wasn't staying on. I wasn't coming back. I didn't reclaim the company to run it. I reclaimed it to protect it. From people like him. From the myth that inheritance and entitlement were the same as sweat and sacrifice. And now it was in better hands. Not mine, but the right ones. I didn't celebrate. When Zach was gone, when the locks were changed, the board reassembled, and the inboxes cleared, I didn't raise a glass. I didn't make a speech. I didn't even stay for lunch. I walked out of the building as quietly as I had walked in. The cold bit at my throat, the wind sharp against my cuffs, but it felt clean, stripped of ceremony, honest. For the first time in a long time, there was nothing left for me to defend. I had done what I came to do, restore the balance. Not win, not conquer. Just bring the center back to where it belonged, to work, to trust, to people who showed up. Zach's fall wasn't a triumph. It was a reckoning. He had spent his entire life mistaking proximity for ownership. Assuming that blood alone gave him claim to a legacy built by hands he never noticed, during years he never cared to remember. When the company was 2 people and a stack of unpaid invoices, Zach was chasing hobbies. When we couldn't afford office chairs and worked on crates, Zach was missing flights to parties in Miami. But the moment Leslie died, the second the world no longer had her voice to steady it, he tried to climb the throne. He didn't see the kingdom was still being built. And he never realized it was never his to inherit. The truth is, Leslie saw him more clearly than I ever did. She hoped he would change, but she never counted on it. That's why she made the papers airtight. That's why her signature is still on every clause. That's why she sat beside me after chemo one night, her hand trembling, and said, "George, don't let him turn this into a monument. It's meant to stay alive." She knew what I didn't. That grief doesn't make people more generous. It just strips away the performance. What Zach did wasn't a surprise. It was simply who he'd always been, revealed without her presence to soften the truth. That Monday morning was the first time in his life he'd been forced to answer for something. And it broke him. The weeks after were quiet. He sent emails at first, angry ones, then legal letters, full of puffed-up threats and empty language. His attorneys used phrases like wrongful displacement and emotional distress. But when we submitted the ownership documents, the case folded before it began. He didn't have a leg to stand on. Not legally. Not morally. He moved out of the city not long after. Someone said he'd gone west, trying to start something new, probably pitching investors on some recycled idea, name-dropping the company he once tried to steal as if it still meant something to him. Let him. He can tell whatever story he wants. Stories are easy. The work is harder. I didn't go back to the company, not in any full-time capacity. I stayed on the books as a consultant, 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. I don't make decisions anymore. I don't attend board meetings. I show up when I'm needed, take meetings with legacy clients, answer a few questions, then leave before the building forgets I was ever there. Sarah runs the company now, and she's better at it than either of us ever were. Leslie would have liked that. She always believed leadership belonged to the willing, not the loud, not the entitled. The willing, the ones who showed up on time, did the work, asked the questions, took the blame when it was theirs, and didn't disappear when the lights dimmed. Sarah never disappeared. Neither did I. I just stepped back. Because there's a moment, if you've been through enough, when you realize survival isn't the same as possession. You can win the house, the title, the bank accounts, but if all you feel in the end is exhaustion, then it wasn't a win. It was just endurance. I endured for Leslie, not for the company, not for revenge, not even for justice, just for her. Because she needed to know that what we built wouldn't become another lie passed down to a man who didn't understand what it cost. She needed to know that someone still remembered the cold nights in the warehouse, the stain of coffee on paperwork, the slow climb from nothing to something real. So I made sure of it. And now I'm done. The house is quiet these days. No visitors. No movement. Just time. I read more. Walk when the weather allows. Eat at the same place on Wednesdays. A corner booth by the window, coffee black, no sugar. I don't explain who I am when someone asks about the company. I just smile and say, I used to work there. It's enough. Leslie's voice is still on the answering machine. I haven't changed it. Sometimes I play it just to hear her say my name. The grief never leaves, but it changes shape. It no longer screams. It sits with me, watches, breathes, and in that quiet, I find something close to peace. I think often about legacy, about what it means to leave something behind. Not money, not buildings, but memory, reputation, the echo of how you treated people when no one was looking. That's what I hope survives. Not a company, not a headline, but the knowledge that when the moment came, I stood for what we built. I didn't let a child with a surname and a smirk rewrite our history. I didn't let blood erase sacrifice. I didn't let family, that brittle word, become a weapon against truth. And now I ask you, all of you who've heard this, who've seen your own quiet betrayals, who've sat at tables where your name was forgotten the moment the ink dried, was I wrong? Was it cruel to let him fall? Or was it the only way to remind the world that titles are earned, not inherited? Would you have done differently? Or would you, like me, finally choose silence over submission, and let the echo of your absence speak louder than the years you spent being ignored? Because in the end, it wasn't revenge. It was restoration. And sometimes the cleanest kind of justice is walking away and watching the empire burn in the silence it created.